Her outrage boiled over. As she called the police, claiming that the man in the red MAGA hat was a threat to society, the crowd watched the spectacle unfold. Some filmed it on their phones, while others wondered how eating breakfast with toast could be considered a crime. But everything changed when the governor walked into the mall and addressed the dangerous offender as his most respected colleague. What happened next turned the situation completely upside down. Karen, a 45-year-old woman confident in her right to punish the world for any deviations from her idea of proper behavior, entered the mall as if it were her kingdom. In her hand, she held a cup of soy latte, and her eyes darted around the space, searching for something worthy of her outrage. She wore a light blue suit, impeccably pressed, and carried a massive handbag that made every step she took a statement. I am an important person. By the fountain sat Kevin. A tall man, about 35 years old, with confident posture and a slightly relaxed expression. He was dressed in a sleek, dark gray suit that underscored his professional style. But the most striking element of his appearance was the red cap with the words, "Make America Great Again," emblazoned on it. It shone like a beacon, drawing attention. To Karen, it was like a red flag to a bull, a symbol of everything wrong in her world. Her face twisted with indignation. She paused for a moment as if gathering all her strength before launching her attack, and then confidently strode toward him. Her heels clicked sharply against the tiles like a drum roll before battle. "Excuse me," she said in a cold but firm tone, standing directly in front of Kevin. "Do you really think it's appropriate to wear such a hat in a respectable place?" Kevin slowly looked up from his newspaper. His gray eyes met her outraged glare, and he smiled. A calm, almost disarming smile. "Good morning," he said, clearly enjoying the moment. "How can I help you?" Karen felt her indignation reach its peak. Her face turned slightly red, and her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. This calmness, her adversary dared to respond without fear. "This is unacceptable," she practically shouted, unable to hold back. "That symbol, it's offensive. How can you wear that in a public place? It's disgraceful." Kevin, showing no sign of embarrassment, gently placed his newspaper on his lap. "It's just a hat," he said, in a tone as if explaining the obvious. His composure only fueled her anger. Her lips tightened, and her nostrils flared slightly. She leaned in a little closer. "Just a hat? Do you even understand what it represents? People who wear things like that provoke hatred and division." Kevin tilted his head slightly, as if pondering her words, but then responded with a light smile. "And isn't this the best place for dialogue? Where else can different views be discussed if not in a public space?" Her face turned bright red, and her voice rose to a level audible across the entire mall. "Dialogue? This isn't about dialogue. This is about morality," she declared, waving her hand toward his hat as if trying to knock it off. At this point, several mall-goers began to take notice of the scene. Some froze, listening, while others quietly pulled out their phones. One passerby muttered something like, "Here we go," while a girl at a nearby table smirked, watching Karen. "Excuse me," interjected a waiter who had just been delivering coffee to another table. "Is everything all right here?" "It will be all right when this man removes his hat," Karen nearly screamed. Her voice echoed through the space. Kevin stood up from his seat, slowly and gracefully, looking her directly in the eyes. "Ma'am," he began in an even tone, "if you're so uncomfortable, perhaps you should find another spot for your latte." The comment was quiet, but loud enough to elicit a chuckle from the crowd. Karen froze, then pulled out her phone. "You think you can win this?" she hissed, beginning to record. "Let's see what the police have to say about this." She started dialing 911, and the air was thick with tension. Karen, as soon as she realized Kevin wasn't going to bend to her moral guidance, clenched her teeth. Her eyes narrowed, and her hand reached into her bag to retrieve her ultimate weapon in the fight for justice, her phone. "People need to know that there are individuals like you in our community," she snapped, aiming her camera at Kevin. "I'm calling the police. Let them see how you're disrupting public order." Kevin, leisurely taking a sip of his coffee, smiled faintly. That smile clearly irritated Karen, as if he wasn't taking her seriously. "Interesting," he said calmly. "How exactly does my clothing break the law?" Karen ignored his question and started speaking into the camera, waving her phone like a microphone. "This man is blatantly provoking the public with hateful symbolism. This is unacceptable in our community." A few people in the mall began whispering. Some, on the other hand, stifled laughter. A man wearing a Red Sox cap muttered under his breath, "Is this for real? Maybe she should just drop it. It's just a hat," quietly added another onlooker. But Karen was relentless. Her voice grew louder, and her fingers jabbed at her phone screen with fervor. "Yes," she said into the phone. "This is an emergency. A man wearing a hat is causing aggression and provoking conflict. He's a safety threat. Yes, the address, Central Mall, Food Court." Kevin, maintaining his composure, leaned back in his chair and looked at Karen thoughtfully. "You seem to be overcomplicating things," he remarked with a slight smile. "Perhaps you should reconsider your actions." His calm demeanor only infuriated her further. She spun around to face the growing crowd. "Does anyone else feel unsafe?" Karen shouted, scanning the bystanders. "Or am I the only one seeing the problem here?" The response was silence. A pair of teenagers eating ice cream exchanged glances and smirked. One whispered to the other, "What is she even talking about?" "Of course, you're all silent," Karen cried, nearly shouting over her own thoughts. "Because you're afraid to speak up, but I'm not afraid." The crowd began to chuckle quietly. Someone pulled out a phone to record the scene. Karen didn't notice. She was certain her mission to protect society was about to succeed. And then, in the distance, the sound of sirens could be heard. Karen straightened up, as if preparing for a parade, ready to showcase her righteousness. Kevin, however, leaned forward slightly, took another sip of his coffee, and appeared as though this spectacle was merely an addition to his morning routine. "Well," he said softly, almost to himself, "this is about to get interesting." A few minutes after Karen's call, 2 police cars screeched into the mall parking lot, their sirens slicing through the morning calm. Karen, standing near the entrance to the food court, lit up with pride. Her face glowed with triumph as she raised her hand to attract the officers' attention, as if greeting her saviors. "Officers, over here!" she shouted, pointing at Kevin. "This man is a threat to everyone's safety. Look at his hat." The officers exchanged glances, slightly bewildered. One of them, a tall man with a thick mustache, raised an eyebrow as if silently asking, "Is this a joke?" "All right, ma'am," he began calmly. "Can you explain what the issue is?" Karen confidently pointed at Kevin, who was still seated at his table, taking another sip of coffee. "He's provoking people with his appearance," she declared. "I and other patrons feel unsafe. His behavior is an act of aggression." The officer, now more perplexed, turned to Kevin. "Sir, what do you have to say about this?" Kevin, setting his cup down unhurriedly, replied with restraint, "Good morning, officer. All I've been doing is eating my breakfast. Then this woman decided my hat was a threat to world order." The second officer, a younger man who looked like he desperately needed a cup of coffee, stared at Karen. "Ma'am, are you saying you called us over a hat?" Karen, flustered by his directness, stammered, "It's not just a hat, it's a symbol of everything wrong. He's provoking people with his arrogance and his tone." "Tone?" the older officer asked, struggling to maintain a straight face. "What exactly did he say?" "He said—" Karen froze, trying to recall anything that would sound incriminating. "He just threatened us with his presence." The crowd that had gathered around began to chuckle softly. One teenager, recording the scene on his phone, whispered, "This is gold." The officer sighed heavily and turned back to Kevin. "Sir, are you sure there haven't been any threats?" Kevin shrugged and smiled. "The only thing I've threatened to do is finish my toast." The crowd erupted in laughter. Karen turned red, her lips trembling with frustration. But before she could respond, a tall man in a sharp suit entered the mall, flanked by a small entourage. It was Governor Sullivan, a figure known for his commanding presence and influence. His arrival instantly silenced the scene. "Kevin," the governor called out, striding toward the table. "Good to see you. Thanks for your insights this morning. They were brilliant. You're a true asset to our state." The governor clapped Kevin on the shoulder, completely ignoring the stunned Karen. She stood frozen, her eyes wide as coins. It was as if her entire worldview had been turned upside down. "And what's all this about?" the governor asked, glancing at the officers and the crowd. "Just a small misunderstanding, sir," Kevin replied calmly. "Some people find my choice of headwear difficult to tolerate." The governor frowned and looked at Karen. "Is that true? You called the police over someone's clothing?" Karen began to mumble. I just thought it was—" "Thought?" the governor interrupted sharply. "Maybe next time you should think before accusing someone." The crowd burst into applause. Karen turned an even deeper shade of red, but said nothing more. She threw one last glare at Kevin, grabbed her things, and fled the mall, leaving behind a trail of awkward defeat. The governor stood directly in front of Karen, his gaze as solid as concrete. He looked at her the way one might look at a child who had broken a family heirloom and was now fumbling for an excuse. "Well," he asked, his voice measured but irritated, "what exactly happened here?" Karen stammered, her earlier confidence deflating like a punctured balloon. She tried to piece together her thoughts into something coherent. I thought he was provoking people with his hat. It caused tension, and I just wanted to—" "Wanted to?" The governor cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "You decided you had the right to judge someone based on what they were wearing." Karen flushed. She cast a quick glance at the crowd, hoping to find support, but the faces she saw showed only disapproval or thinly veiled amusement. The officers, standing off to the side, exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the absurdity of the situation. "Do you even know who this man is?" the governor continued, gesturing toward Kevin. "He's one of the best attorneys in our state, someone who works every day to protect citizens' rights. This man has done more for society than you could ever imagine." Karen opened her mouth, but only a faint squeak came out. She looked as if she wished the ground would swallow her whole. "Perhaps you should reconsider your behavior," the governor added. "Instead of causing scenes, try showing respect for others, even if their views differ from yours." The crowd erupted into applause. People began to laugh and chat amongst themselves about what had just transpired. Someone shouted, "Hey Karen, was the hat too dangerous for you?" Her face turned crimson, and without saying another word, she turned and hurried toward the exit. The crowd parted for her, accompanying her retreat with chuckles and remarks. As the doors closed behind her, one of the officers approached Kevin. "Sir, we apologize for the misunderstanding." His voice was sincere. It seems you got caught in the crossfire of passion. No harm done, Kevin replied with a light smile. Sometimes the best thing to do is stay calm and let the situation resolve itself. At that moment, someone called out, "Hey, Kevin, can we get a picture? You're a legend now." Kevin chuckled, motioning for people to come closer. A few snapped selfies with him, and someone was already uploading the video online. The crowd began to disperse, still animatedly discussing what had happened. The next day, footage of the incident flooded social media. The video showed Karen ranting about provocation, the officers staying calm, and the governor delivering a public lesson. Online users didn't hold back on the sarcasm. Karen found her ultimate enemy, a man with toast and a hat, or when your greatest failure, calling the cops on a legal genius. Kevin, reading the comments, simply smiled. He didn't post replies or make statements. The fact that the truth had prevailed was enough for him. As for Karen, she appeared to have deleted all her accounts and retreated into the shadows, where, many agreed, she belonged. Sometimes, the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be seen.